$4.12. That's what integrity costs in Chicago. My name is Ava Reed. I'm 28 years old, and my father was Marcus Reed, badge number 4477, the cop who died stopping a robbery in Inglewood back in 2011. I grew up believing that badge meant something, that standing up for strangers mattered. I was about to learn how wrong I was. It was December, the kind of cold that cuts through your uniform like a knife. I was walking through an alley near the Gold Coast when I heard laughter, the cruel kind. 3 men in designer coats stood around an old man, maybe 70, shivering in a threadbare coat. One of them was pouring a $500 bottle of scotch over the old man's head. I stepped between them, my hand hovered near my holster. "That's enough. Step back." The blonde one turned. His smirk hit me before his words did. "Do you have any idea who my father is, rookie?" I kept my voice level, professional. "I don't care who your father is. Step back now." He pulled out his phone, aimed it at me like a weapon. "Officer Reed? Fine. I'm Jackson Thorne, Commissioner Richard Thorne's son. Remember that name." I gave the old man my last $20. Told him to get a cab, get somewhere safe. I recorded everything on my personal phone because my body cam had mysteriously failed. I thought I was just doing my job. The next morning, I was summoned to Commissioner Richard Thorne's office. "The video you claim to have? Gone. Corrupted." He tossed a complaint form on his desk. "Your badge?" He held out his hand. "I'll take it now." My brother Leo, 21 years old, dying of heart failure, was being discharged from the hospital because the transplant deposit I'd scraped together had disappeared from the system. My bank account was drained by phantom overdraft fees. The state filed a guardianship petition claiming I was financially unfit to care for him. I sat in my apartment with $4.12 in my account, listening to my brother's oxygen concentrator wheeze, and I wondered, am I just a burden to everyone? After everything I've given, what's going to happen now? Before we go any further, please hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you give this a like, good luck is coming your way. At the time, I had no idea. No idea the man I'd given my last $20 to wasn't just some homeless guy. No idea he was Elias Sterling, retired Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court. No idea that standing in that freezing alley would flip my entire world upside down. All I knew was this: I was 28 years old, my brother was dying, and I just lost everything for helping a stranger. But sometimes strangers aren't what they seem. Chicago in mid-December wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that made your bones ache. That turned your breath into ghost white clouds hanging in the air like accusations. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through Ava Reed's thin patrol uniform as if the fabric were made of paper, not polyester. She'd been on the force for 16 months, long enough to know that a rookie's paycheck didn't stretch to cover a proper winter coat. Not when there were other bills screaming for attention. 28 years old, and she was standing at her kitchen table in a third-floor walk-up on the South Side, staring at a piece of paper that might as well have been a death sentence. The Medicare denial notice was printed on cheap government stock, the kind that felt rough against her fingertips. Patient Leo Reed. Procedure: heart transplant. Status denied. The red stamp seemed to pulse under the overhead light, mocking her with its bureaucratic finality. Ava Reed, daughter of Marcus Reed, the cop who'd taken a bullet in Inglewood trying to stop a convenience store robbery back in 2011, the cop whose funeral had stretched 3 city blocks with mourners in dress blues pulled open the kitchen drawer with more force than necessary. The silverware rattled. Beneath the forks and knives, wrapped in a faded evidence bag, sat her father's old badge. Silver, tarnished now, number 4477. She lifted it out, felt its weight in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, dense with the weight of a legacy she could barely afford to keep breathing. The apartment smelled like instant ramen and the faint medicinal odor that clung to everything since Leo had come home from the hospital 3 weeks ago. From the living room, she could hear the steady wheeze of his oxygen concentrator. A sound that had become as constant as the L train rumbling past every 15 minutes. Her younger brother, 21 years old, supposed to be finishing college, supposed to be worrying about finals and dating and whether to go to grad school, was instead lying on a second-hand couch with a failing heart, counting down the days until his body gave up entirely. Ava set the badge down next to the denial letter. The juxtaposition felt obscene. Her father had died protecting strangers. She couldn't even protect her own brother. She'd already picked up a double shift that week, 16 hours on Monday, another 16 on Wednesday. Her lieutenant had looked at her with something close to pity when she'd volunteered for the overnight patrol in Garfield Park. The kind of shift nobody wanted because it meant breaking up fights outside closed liquor stores and writing reports on stolen catalytic converters until your eyes burned. But it paid time and a half, and time and a half meant maybe, just maybe, she could scrape together enough for the specialist consultation Leo needed, the one his insurance refused to authorize. The cold followed her everywhere. Even inside the apartment, she could feel it seeping through the old single-pane windows, through the gaps in the door frame. She pulled on her father's old CPD Academy hoodie over her uniform. The fabric was worn soft. The Chicago Police Department logo faded to a ghost of itself and checked her watch. 10:47 p.m. Her shift had ended at 10, but she'd stayed late to finish the paperwork on a domestic disturbance call. A woman with a black eye and a toddler clinging to her leg. A man shouting from the hallway that she was overreacting, that he'd barely touched her. Ava had written it all down in careful block letters, documented the bruising, taken the photographs, filled out the forms. She'd done everything by the book, just like her father had taught her. The woman had signed the complaint. The man had been taken downtown. And Ava knew she knew with the certainty of someone who'd seen this play out a dozen times before that by morning, the woman would recant. She'd say it was a misunderstanding. She'd drop the charges, and the man would be back home by lunchtime, and in a month or a year or 5 years. Ava would be called back to the same apartment for the same thing, only next time maybe the woman wouldn't be answering the door. That was the job. That was the city. She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door, checked that her phone was charged. She needed to get some air. Needed to clear her head before she went to bed and stared at the ceiling for 6 hours pretending to sleep. The streets were safer than her thoughts tonight. The drive took her through neighborhoods she knew by heart, past the closed-up storefronts on 63rd Street, past the church with the crumbling brick facade and the hand-painted sign that read, "Jesus Saves," past the corner where she'd arrested a kid selling dime bags last month, a kid who couldn't have been older than 15. She'd cuffed him, read him his rights, watched his mother scream at her in the street, calling her a traitor, calling her worse. The mother was right, in a way. What kind of cop arrests a kid for trying to make rent? But rules were rules. The law was the law. That's what her father had always said. Ava found herself heading north, toward the Gold Coast, toward the part of Chicago that looked like a different city entirely. Here, the streets were clean. The buildings were lit up like Christmas displays, all glass and steel and money. The cars parked along the curbs were German, expensive, the kind that cost more than she'd make in 5 years. She told herself she was just driving, just burning time, but she knew that wasn't true. She was looking for something. A reminder that somewhere in this city, people were living lives that didn't involve choosing between groceries and prescriptions. That's when she saw the black SUV. It was idling in an alley just off Rush Street, exhaust clouding in the frigid air. The alley was narrow, poorly lit, the kind of place you didn't go unless you were looking for trouble or trying to avoid it. Ava slowed her patrol car, instinct prickling at the back of her neck. She'd learned to trust that feeling, the one that said something was wrong even before your brain caught up. She pulled to the curb, killed the engine, stepped out into the cold. The voices reached her first, laughter, sharp and cruel, the kind of laughter that had edges. Then she saw them, 3 figures clustered near a dumpster. 2 large men in black winter coats flanking a younger guy in what looked like a designer parka, the kind with real fur trim on the hood. They were surrounding someone, a smaller figure backed against the brick wall. Ava's hand went to her belt, to the flashlight clipped there. She clicked it on, swept the beam across the scene. The man against the wall was old 70, maybe older, with white hair and a face carved with deep lines. He was wearing a threadbare coat that might have been navy blue once but had faded to something closer to gray. And his hands were raised in a gesture that was half surrender, half plea. At his feet was a puddle of liquid, dark and spreading across the pavement. The younger man, mid-20s, blonde, with the kind of jawline that suggested expensive orthodontics and a lifetime of good nutrition, was holding a bottle. Scotch. The label caught the flashlight beam. Macallan 25. Ava knew enough to know that bottle cost more than her monthly rent. He'd poured it over the old man's head. "Step back," Ava said, her voice cutting through the cold. Her hand moved to her holster, not drawing, not yet, but hovering. "All of you, step back now." The blond man turned, and even in the dim light, Ava could see the sneer that crossed his face. He looked at her uniform, at her badge, and something like recognition flickered in his eyes. "Do you have any idea who my father is, rookie?" The way he said it, not as a question, but as a threat, made something cold settle in Ava's chest. This wasn't fear. This was something else. This was the moment where the choice got made, where you either backed down or you didn't. Ava didn't back down. She pulled out her phone, angled it to capture the scene. Her body cam should have been recording department policy. Every interaction documented, but the red light that usually blinked on her shoulder mount was dark. Battery dead, or more likely, the wireless sync to the precinct server had failed again. The department's tech was a joke, always glitching, always convenient when someone needed a recording to disappear. So she used her personal phone instead. The blond man's eyes tracked the movement, and for just a second, something like uncertainty crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same entitled sneer. "You're making a mistake," he said. Ava ignored him. She turned to the old man, who was still pressed against the wall, scotch dripping from his hair, his coat. The smell of expensive alcohol mixing with the scent of the alley, rotting garbage and diesel fumes, and something sweet and sickly that might have been mold. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice level, professional. "Are you hurt?" The old man met her eyes, and for a moment, Ava saw something there that surprised her. Not fear, not shame, something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was steady, educated, the kind of voice that didn't belong in an alley behind a dumpster. "Just a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," the blond man said, laughing. "We were just having fun. Right, guys?" The two men flanking him laughed too, mechanical and hollow. Ava looked at the old man's coat, at the way it hung off his frame like he'd lost weight recently, at the worn-through soles of his shoes. She pulled a $20 bill from her pocket, the last cash she had until payday, which wasn't for another 6 days, and pressed it into his hand. "Get a cab," she said quietly. "Get somewhere warm. This city isn't what it used to be." The old man's fingers closed around the bill, and he looked at her with those pale eyes, ancient and sharp at the same time. "No," he said softly. "It isn't." Ava watched him walk away, his steps careful on the icy pavement, until he turned the corner and disappeared into the night. When she turned back, the blond man and his friends were already getting into the SUV, doors slamming, engine revving. The vehicle pulled out of the alley with a screech of tires, leaving her standing there in the cold with the smell of wasted scotch hanging in the air. She looked down at her phone, at the video she'd recorded. The quality was grainy, the lighting poor, but you could make out faces. You could hear the voices. You could see exactly what had happened. Ava saved the file, backed it up to the cloud, then sent a copy to her personal email. Belt and suspenders. That's what her father used to say. Never trust just one system. The drive home was quiet. The L train had stopped running for the night, so the streets were emptier than usual. Just the occasional taxi and the glow of 24-hour convenience stores breaking up the darkness. When she got back to her apartment, Leo was asleep on the couch, the oxygen concentrator wheezing beside him. His face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake. Ava stood in the doorway, watching her brother breathe, counting the seconds between each rise and fall of his chest. She pulled out her phone, looked at the video one more time. The blond man's face, frozen in mid-sneer. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" She didn't know, not yet, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. The summons came at 7:32 a.m., before Ava had even finished her first cup of coffee. She was standing in the precinct locker room, still in her civilian clothes. Jeans worn soft at the knees, her father's old academy hoodie, boots with salt stains creeping up the leather. The 401k early withdrawal penalty notice was taped to the inside of her locker door, right next to the photo of Leo. From his high school graduation, back when his face still had color, back when he could walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to catch his breath. The notice was from her bank, informing her that withdrawing funds early would cost her an additional 10% penalty on top of the taxes she'd already owe. She'd done the math 3 times. Even with the penalty, even bleeding money she didn't have, it wouldn't be enough to cover the transplant deposit. Officer Chen walked past, gave her a tight nod. No words. Chen had been on the force for 6 years, long enough to know when someone was being watched. Ava's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Commissioner Thorne's office. 0800. Don't be late. She looked at the message, at the cold formality of it, and felt that same instinct from last night prickle at the base of her skull. Something was wrong. Something was moving, shifting, the way tectonic plates shift right before an earthquake. She changed into her uniform, checked that her badge was pinned straight, that her boots were polished, that every crease was sharp. Armor. That's what her father used to call it. You put on that uniform, you're putting on armor. Act like it. The walk to the commissioner's office took her through the heart of the precinct, past the bullpen, where detectives hunched over coffee and case files, past the evidence room with its chain-link cage and flickering fluorescent lights, past the wall of photographs showing every officer who died in the line of duty since 1872. Her father's photo was there, 3rd row from the bottom, his face young and serious in his dress blues. She didn't look at it. Couldn't. Not today. Commissioner Richard Thorne's office was on the 3rd floor, corner position, with windows overlooking the street. The outer office was empty. His secretary hadn't arrived yet, but the door to the inner office stood open. An invitation, or a trap. Ava stepped through. Thorne was standing behind his desk, a man built like a linebacker. Gone slightly to seed, 58 years old with iron gray hair, cut military short and eyes the color of dirty ice. He was wearing his dress uniform, the one with all the commendations pinned to the chest, the one he wore when he needed to remind people of his rank. On his desk sat a manila folder, thin, maybe 10 pages thick. Next to it, a coffee mug with the CPD logo and a ring of stains on the rim. He didn't invite her to sit. "Read," he said. His voice had the texture of gravel being ground under a boot heel. "You've been busy, sir." Thorne picked up the manila folder, flipped it open. "Last night, Gold Coast, you responded to a disturbance call." Ava's pulse kicked up, but she kept her face neutral. "That's correct, sir. 3 individuals harassing an elderly man. I intervened, ensured the victim's safety, and documented the incident." Documented. Thorne said the word like it tasted bad. "You mean this?" He turned his computer monitor around. On the screen was her personnel file, and beneath it, a complaint form. Citizen complaint, excessive force. Complainant Jackson Thorne. The name hit her like a physical blow. "Thorne. Jackson Thorne. That's your son," Ava said before she could stop herself. The commissioner's expression didn't change. "That's irrelevant. What's relevant is that you threatened 3 law-abiding citizens without cause, without backup, and without proper documentation. The body cam footage shows nothing. The precinct server shows no upload from your unit last night. And the video you claim to have taken on your personal device?" He paused, let the silence stretch. It's gone. Ava felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Gone? Cloud backup failed. File corrupted. IT says it happens sometimes with personal devices interfacing with city networks. Thorne leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. You understand what this looks like, don't you, Reed? An officer with a sick brother, medical bills piling up, pulling over civilians in a wealthy neighborhood. Some people might call that a shakedown. The word hung in the air like poison gas. I didn't, Ava started, but Thorne held up one hand. I'm not interested in your excuses. What I'm interested in is maintaining the integrity of this department. Your father was a good cop, Reed. A hero. But that doesn't buy you a free pass to embarrass us. He closed the folder with a snap. You're suspended, effective immediately. Pending investigation. The world narrowed to a pinpoint, then expanded again, too bright, too sharp. You can't. I can. I did. Badge and weapon. Now. Ava's hands moved on autopilot, unpinning the badge from her chest, unholstering her service weapon, setting both on the desk with a care that felt obscene. The metal made a soft click against the wood. Thorne didn't look at them. You'll be notified of the hearing date. Until then, consider yourself relieved of duty. Dismissed. She turned to go, her legs moving mechanically, one foot in front of the other. Reed. She stopped, didn't turn around. Your father knew when to walk away. I hope you're half as smart as he was. The hallway outside was too bright, the fluorescent lights buzzing like insects. Ava walked past Chen, past the other officers clustered near the coffee machine, past the wall of dead heroes. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting already. The daughter of Marcus Reed, suspended for shaking down civilians. The rookie who couldn't hack it. Her locker was in the same state she'd left it the penalty notice. Leo's photo, the spare uniform hanging on its hook. She pulled out her gym bag, started shoving things inside. Notebook, pens, the half-empty bottle of Advil she kept for the headaches that came with double shifts. Her phone buzzed. A text from Leo, hospital called. Deposit didn't go through. They're discharging me this afternoon. Can you pick me up? Ava read the message twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. She slammed her locker door. The sound echoed through the empty room, sharp and final as a gunshot. The metal was cold under her palm, cold and unyielding. And for a moment she just stood there, her forehead pressed against the door, trying to breathe, trying to think. This wasn't an error. This wasn't bureaucratic incompetence or bad luck or the random chaos of an underfunded healthcare system. This was a hit. Someone had reached into the hospital's billing system, into her bank's database, into the precinct's evidence server, and they'd erased her. They'd made her disappear, piece by piece, transaction by transaction, until there was nothing left. But the shell of a person who used to be a cop, used to have a future, used to believe that doing the right thing mattered. I was just doing my job, Ava whispered to the empty locker room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, aggressive and unrelenting. She pulled back her fist and drove it into the locker door, once, twice, 3 times, until her knuckles split and bled. And the pain in her hand was sharp enough to cut through the numbness spreading through her chest. The door dented, barely, just enough to show that she'd been there, that she'd existed, that she'd fought back. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Ava wrapped her bleeding knuckles in a paper towel from the dispenser, grabbed her gym bag, and walked out of the precinct for what she was starting to think might be the last time. The morning roll call happened without her, but Ava heard about it anyway. Officer Chen texted her at 9:47 a.m., "I'm sorry." It was brutal. That was all. No details. Just those 4 words and the weight of everything they didn't say. Ava was sitting in her car in the precinct parking lot, the engine running for heat, staring at her phone like it might suddenly start telling her the truth. Her hands ached, the left one from punching the locker, the right from gripping the steering wheel too hard. The paper towel wrapped around her knuckles had soaked through, dark spots spreading across the white like ink in water. She called Chen. "Don't," Chen said, picking up on the first ring. Don't ask me to repeat it. I need to know. A long exhale on the other end. Traffic sounds in the background, the crackle of a radio. Chen was on patrol, calling from the squad car, risking a write-up just to give Ava this much. Thorne stood at the podium. He had your file. He read it out loud, every disciplinary note, every late report, every single car accident you got into during your first month on the job. Then he called you a disgrace to your father's name, said you were running shakedowns on civilians, targeting wealthy neighborhoods because you needed money for your brother. Ava's grip on the phone tightened. He said that? About Leo? Word for word. He called you a shakedown artist. Said the department had zero tolerance for corruption, no matter whose daughter you were. Chen paused. His son was there, in the back of the room. He was filming it on his phone. The world tilted sideways. Jackson Thorne had been there, watching, recording, turning her public humiliation into content, into evidence, into ammunition. I'm sorry, Ava, Chen said quietly. I wanted to say something, but you have a family to feed, Ava finished. I get it. It's not right. No, it's not. She hung up before Chen could say anything else, before the sympathy in her voice could crack open the fragile shell Ava had built around herself. Through the windshield, she could see officers coming and going from the precinct entrance, day shift starting, night shift ending, the machinery of law enforcement grinding forward regardless of who got crushed beneath it. She recognized most of the faces. Johnson, who'd helped her study for the sergeant's exam she'd never get to take now. Martinez, who'd bought her coffee on her first day and told her it would get easier. Williams, who'd shown her how to write a report that would actually hold up in court. None of them looked at her car. None of them even glanced in her direction. That's when she understood. Thorne hadn't just fired her. He'd made an example of her. He'd turned her into a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who might think about stepping out of line. This is what happens when you cross the commissioner's family. This is what happens when you forget your place. Ava pulled out of the parking lot, drove aimlessly through streets she knew by heart. Past the elementary school where she'd met Leo for lunch last month, back when he could still walk the 3 blocks from their apartment. Past the bodega where she bought lottery tickets every Friday, $50 a month she couldn't afford to spend on a dream she'd never see realize. Past the church where her father's funeral had been held, the one with the stained glass windows showing saints she didn't believe in. And a God who'd stopped listening years ago. The rain started around 11, cold and relentless, turning the streets into rivers of gray slush. Ava's windshield wipers were dying, one blade torn, the other stuttering across the glass in uneven strokes, but she didn't fix them. She just drove, watching the city blur into watercolor smears of concrete and neon. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her bank: overdraft fee minus $35. Another one: returned payment fee minus $25. Another: insufficient funds minus $35. The fees were piling up faster than she could track them, each one a small violence. A reminder that poverty wasn't just about not having money, it was about being punished for not having money, charged for the crime of being broke. She pulled over on a side street, killed the engine, and just sat there in the silence, listening to the rain drum against the roof of her car. Her civilian coat, the only one she owned that wasn't her uniform jacket, was soaked through from the walk to the car this morning. The fabric clung to her shoulders, cold and heavy, smelling of damp wool and defeat. She peeled it off, tossed it into the back seat where it landed with a wet slap. She needed to call Mark. She needed to tell him what had happened, needed to hear his voice, needed him to tell her it would be okay even though she knew it wouldn't be. But when she pulled out her phone, there was already a message from him waiting. Dinner tonight at my parents' place. 7 p.m. Don't be late. Mom's making the announcement about the wedding. The wedding. Ava had almost forgotten. Mark Sterling, 32 years old, corporate defense attorney with a corner office and a partnership track that looked like a highway to heaven, was supposed to marry Ava Reed, the daughter of a dead cop, the sister of a dying kid, the disgraced rookie who couldn't even keep her badge for 2 full years. She stared at the message, at the casual assumption that she'd show up, that she'd smile and nod and pretend everything was fine while Mark's mother talked about venue options and flower arrangements and whether to do a plated dinner or a buffet. The Sterlings lived in Lincoln Park, in a mansion that had been in the family for 3 generations. Mark's grandfather had been a federal judge. His mother sat on the boards of half a dozen charities. His father had retired from a prestigious law firm at 55 and spent his days golfing and collecting vintage cars. They'd never understood what Mark saw in Ava. They'd never said it out loud. The Sterlings were too well bred for that, but she could see it in the way Mark's mother looked at her, in the careful politeness of her father's questions about her career in law enforcement, in the way conversations seemed to pause when she entered a room, as if everyone was waiting for her to realize she didn't belong. And maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong anywhere. Ava looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come half undone. She looked older than 28. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been fighting a war she couldn't win and was finally starting to understand that surrender might be the only option left. She started typing a response to Mark. "I can't do this anymore. You deserve someone who isn't drowning. Someone who can actually show up to dinner without bringing a disaster with her." Her thumb hovered over the send button. From the apartment complex across the street, she could see a family loading boxes into a moving truck, a mother, a father, 2 kids, all of them laughing about something, oblivious to the rain. The kids were wearing matching raincoats, bright yellow, like tiny beacons of normalcy in a world that had forgotten what normal looked like. Ava deleted the message. She would go to dinner. She would tell Mark and his family the truth. She would end the engagement with whatever dignity she had left. And then she would figure out what came next, alone, the way she should have been all along. But first, she had to pick up Leo from the hospital. She drove to Northwestern Memorial, parked in the visitor lot, where the fees were criminal but unavoidable, and walked through the sliding glass doors into the smell of antiseptic and recycled air. The discharge desk was on the 3rd floor. Leo was waiting in a wheelchair, hospital policy. Even though he could walk, even though forcing him to sit there like an invalid was just another small cruelty disguised as procedure. "Hey, sis," he said when he saw her. His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of someone whose lungs couldn't quite fill all the way. "Fancy meeting you here." Ava tried to smile, failed. "Let's go home." The nurse handed her a plastic bag with Leo's medications. Pills for blood pressure, pills for fluid retention, pills to keep his damaged heart beating just a little bit longer. The pharmacy co-pays alone would cost more than she had in her account. "You look like hell," Leo said as she wheeled him toward the elevator. "Thanks, you too." He laughed, a sound like paper tearing. "At least I have an excuse." The drive home was quiet. Leo dozed in the passenger seat, his head tilted against the window, his breath fogging the glass. Ava kept the radio off, couldn't stand the cheerful voices of DJs selling products. She couldn't afford to people who'd never had to choose between heat and food. When they got back to the apartment, Leo went straight to the couch, didn't even take off his shoes. Ava covered him with the blanket that lived permanently on the armrest. The one that smelled like their father's old cologne because she'd never had the heart to wash it. She stood in the doorway watching him sleep, counting the seconds between breaths the way she'd done every night since he came home from the hospital. 21 years old, her baby brother. The kid who used to make her watch superhero movies on repeat. Who'd taught himself guitar by watching YouTube videos. Who'd gotten into Northwestern on a full scholarship and was supposed to be studying neuroscience. Supposed to be changing the world. Supposed to have a future that didn't involve oxygen concentrators and Medicare denials and a sister who couldn't save him. Ava's phone buzzed. Another notification. This time, not from the bank. It was an official-looking email with the state seal in the header. Subject line: guardianship application, Leo Reed. She opened it with shaking hands. The document was dense, full of legal language that she had to read 3 times to understand. But the core of it was simple: someone had filed a petition claiming that Ava was financially unfit to care for Leo, that she lacked the resources to provide adequate medical care, that the state should assume guardianship to ensure his well-being. The petitioner was listed as anonymous concerned party, but Ava knew exactly who'd filed it. She looked at Leo, still sleeping, his face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake, when he had to confront the reality of his failing body and his failing sister and a system designed to grind people like them into dust. "Am I just a burden to everyone?" she whispered to the empty room. The question hung there, unanswered, because there was no one to answer it. Except the walls and the wheeze of the oxygen concentrator and the rain still drumming against the windows. She pulled out her phone, called Mark. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hey, babe," he answered, his voice warm and easy, the voice of someone whose day hadn't included public humiliation and guardianship petitions. "You on your way? Mom's already setting the table. I need to talk to you," Ava said. "Not at dinner. Now." A pause. "What's wrong?" "Everything. Everything is wrong, Mark. And I can't keep dragging you down with me. Ava, you deserve a life without this chaos. Without me. My world is drowning, and I'm not going to take you with it." "Stop," Mark said, his voice firm now, cutting through her spiral. "Just stop. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out. Together." "There is no together. Not anymore. They took my badge. They're trying to take Leo. They're erasing me, Mark, and I don't know how to fight back." Silence on the other end. She could hear him breathing, could imagine him standing in his parents' mansion, surrounded by art and antiques and the weight of 3 generations of success, trying to figure out how to save a girlfriend who didn't want to be saved. "Come to dinner," he said finally. "Let me help you." "I can't." "You can. You're the strongest person I know, Ava. Don't give up now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that strength mattered, that showing up mattered, that any of this mattered. Instead, she hung up. She walked to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer where she kept the things that didn't have homes anywhere else: rubber bands, takeout menus, batteries that might be dead, the spare key to her father's storage unit. And at the bottom, wrapped in a paper napkin, her father's badge. She unwrapped it slowly, felt the weight of it in her palm again. Number 4477. The number that had been retired when he died, given to her in a velvet box at the funeral, along with the folded flag and the condolences of a mayor who'd never met him. She looked at the paper shredder sitting on the counter, a cheap thing she'd bought at Target for $19.99 because she'd needed to destroy old medical bills, old bank statements, old evidence of a life that kept getting smaller. She held the badge over the shredder's mouth. One motion. That's all it would take. Drop it in. Listen to the metal scream as it got chewed apart, and she'd be free. Free of the legacy. Free of the expectation. Free of the weight of trying to be someone her father would be proud of. When she couldn't even keep herself employed. Her hand trembled. The badge caught the light from the window, throwing fragments of brightness across the wall. She stood there for a long time, the shredder humming patiently, waiting. Finally, she lowered her hand. Put the badge back in its napkin. Back in the drawer. Not yet. Not today. But she could feel the day coming. The day when she'd have nothing left to hold onto, when the last piece of her father would slip through her fingers like water. And she'd finally understand that some fights couldn't be won no matter how hard you tried. The apartment was dark except for the glow from the refrigerator. Ava hadn't bothered turning on the lights when she came home from the hospital with Leo. What was the point? Darkness didn't cost anything. Darkness didn't send bills or notices or petitions claiming you weren't fit to take care of your own family. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd stared at the Medicare denial 2 days ago, a lifetime ago. The surface was scratched and water-stained, the kind of table you bought used because you couldn't afford new. The kind that came with someone else's history carved into the wood. Her bank balance glowed on her phone screen: $4.12. $4.12. That was what 28 years of trying to do the right thing added up to. $4.12 between her and complete collapse. She refreshed the app, as if the numbers might change, as if some miracle might have occurred in the 3 minutes since she'd last checked. The balance didn't move, it just sat there, accusatory and final. From the living room came the sound of Leo coughing deep, rattling coughs that seemed to go on forever. Then the wheeze of the oxygen concentrator picking up, compensating, trying to keep him breathing. The machine was old, a loaner from the hospital, and it made a sound like someone sighing over and over, disappointed but resigned. A sound of impending death. That's what it was, Ava realized. That's what she'd been listening to every night for 3 weeks. The sound of her brother's body giving up, cell by cell, breath by breath, while she sat in the next room, counting pennies and pretending there was anything she could do to stop it. She looked at the pile of mail on the table. Bills, mostly. A few pieces of junk mail offering her credit cards she'd never qualify for, loans with interest rates that should be illegal, insurance policies that wouldn't cover anything that actually mattered. And there, near the bottom of the pile, a new envelope. Official state letterhead. She picked it up, already knowing what it would say, her hands steady in a way that felt wrong, mechanical. Guardianship application Leo Reed. Hearing scheduled for January 15. Petitioner claims financial instability, inability to provide adequate medical care, failure to maintain stable employment. Every word was true. That was the worst part. Every single accusation was backed by evidence, by facts, by the cold mathematics of poverty. She couldn't provide adequate medical care. She didn't have stable employment. Her financial situation was a disaster held together with hope and duct tape, and now the hope was gone and the tape was peeling. The state was going to take Leo. They were going to put him in a facility somewhere, some sterile room with beige walls and nurses who rotated every shift so they never had to remember his name. They'd keep him alive on machines and Medicare funding. And he'd die there, alone, staring at a ceiling that wasn't his, in a place that smelled like industrial cleaning products and resignation. And Ava wouldn't be able to stop it, because she was a failure, a burden, a woman who couldn't even keep her badge for 2 years, who got herself suspended for doing the right thing, who thought showing up and trying mattered when the world had been trying to tell her for months that none of it mattered, that people like her and Leo didn't matter, that they were disposable, forgettable. The kind of people who fell through the cracks and no one even noticed they were gone. She picked up the photo of her father from the counter, the one from his academy graduation, back when he was 23, and believed the oath he'd just taken, believed that justice was real and good guys won and the system worked if you worked the system. Am I just a burden to everyone? She whispered to his frozen smile. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. He'd been dead for 13 years. Buried in a cemetery. She couldn't afford to visit because gas was $3.89 a gallon and her car got 18 miles to the gallon and the cemetery was 40 minutes away. Her father had died protecting strangers. And what had she accomplished? She'd lost her job, lost her savings, was about to lose her brother. She'd failed at everything that mattered. She put the photo down, picked up her phone, pulled up Mark's contact. They were supposed to get married in April. Spring wedding, his mother had said, when the gardens at the venue would be in bloom. Ava had smiled and nodded and pretended she could see herself in a white dress, walking down an aisle toward a future that looked nothing like her present. But she couldn't keep pretending. She typed, "Mark, we need to end this." Deleted it. Tried again. "I love you, but I can't do this to you anymore." Deleted it. Finally settled on, "You deserve a life without this chaos, Mark. My world is drowning, and I'm not taking you with me. I'm sorry." Her thumb hovered over the send button. From the living room, "Ava?" Leo's voice, weak and raspy. She shoved her phone in her pocket, walked to where he was lying on the couch, the blanket pulled up to his chin even though the apartment was too warm. Even though the radiator was clanking and hissing the way it did when it was working too hard. "What do you need?" she asked. "Nothing. Just." He looked at her, and his eyes were ancient, the eyes of someone who'd already made peace with dying. "Are you okay?" The question was so absurd, so perfectly inverted her dying brother asking if she was okay that Ava felt something crack open in her chest. "I'm fine," she lied. Liar. He tried to smile, couldn't quite manage it. "I heard you on the phone earlier. With Mark. That was nothing. You're pushing him away." It wasn't a question. Ava didn't answer. "Don't," Leo said. "Don't do that thing where you decide you're protecting people by leaving them. That's not protection. That's just you being scared." "I'm not scared. I'm realistic. Look around, Leo. Look at this place. Look at us. Mark deserves better than." "Then what? Then you?" Leo started coughing again, his whole body shaking with the force of it. Ava grabbed the cup of water from the side table, helped him take a sip. When he could breathe again, he said, "You think you're a burden. I can see it on your face every time you look at me." "That's not true." "It is true. You think Dad would be ashamed of you because you're not wearing a badge anymore. You think Mark's family looks down on you because you're not rich. You think I'd be better off if I was someone else's problem." He took another wheezing breath. "But here's what you don't get, sis. None of that matters to the people who actually love you. We don't love you because you're perfect. We love you because you're you." Ava felt her eyes burning. She blinked hard, forced the tears back. "I can't save you. The state is going to take you, and I can't stop them. So don't save me. Just be here. That's all I need. Just you, being here." The simplicity of it was devastating. Just be here. As if that were enough. As if her presence could substitute for medical care and financial stability and all the things she couldn't provide. She looked at her brother, 21 years old, his skin pale, his lips faintly blue, his chest rising and falling with effort, and she wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the world apart with her bare hands, wanted to find everyone who'd ever filed a denial form or signed a guardianship petition, or cut a cloud backup or threatened her in an office while wearing too many medals, and she wanted to make them understand what they were taking from her. But she didn't scream. She just sat down on the floor next to the couch, her back against the worn fabric, and said, "I'm here." "Good," Leo said. He closed his eyes. "That's good." The oxygen concentrator wheezed. The radiator clanked. Outside, a siren wailed past, growing louder then fading. The sound of someone else's emergency, someone else's crisis, the city grinding forward regardless of who got left behind. Ava pulled her phone back out, looked at the unsent message to Mark. She deleted it, not because Leo was right, she wasn't sure he was. Not because she thought she deserved Mark or a wedding in April, or any kind of future that didn't involve living on $4.12 and counting the seconds between her brother's breaths. But because she was tired. So tired. And maybe, just for tonight, she could let herself have one thing that didn't hurt. She called Mark. He answered on the first ring. "Ava, are you coming to dinner?" "No," she said. "But can you come here instead? I just need you here. I'm on my way." She hung up, set the phone down, and waited in the dark apartment for her fiancé to arrive, for her brother to keep breathing, for morning to come and bring whatever fresh disaster waited on the other side of sleep. She didn't know it yet, but in a storage unit across town, in a box her father had labeled, "Just in case," there was a backup drive that held every corrupt deal Richard Thorne had made over 15 years of climbing the CPD ranks. Marcus Reed had been a good cop, a thorough cop, the kind who kept insurance policies hidden in places his daughter would eventually find them. But Ava didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she was 28 years old, unemployed, nearly bankrupt, and watching her brother die by degrees while the city she'd sworn to protect dismantled her life piece by piece. All she knew was that she'd hit rock bottom, and the only way left to go was down. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't know it until tomorrow. Friends, what a journey we've been on so far with Ava Reed. 28 years old, daughter of a hero cop, and she thought doing the right thing would be enough. She thought standing up for an old man being humiliated in an alley would be just another night on patrol. Instead, she lost everything: her badge, her savings, and now they're coming for her brother. Commissioner Thorne thought he could erase her. His son thought she'd disappear like all the other voices they'd silenced. They thought being rich and connected meant they could rewrite reality, delete evidence, turn a good cop into a cautionary tale. But here's what they don't know yet: Ava's father was the kind of cop who kept records. The kind who knew that in a city like Chicago, insurance wasn't optional. And somewhere in the evidence he left behind is a weapon they never saw coming. Stay with us, friends. Because Ava Reed is about to discover that rock bottom has a trapdoor. And on the other side is something neither the Thornes nor anyone else in this city is prepared for. The storm is coming, and it has a name. Mark arrived 40 minutes later, still in his suit from work, his tie loosened but still knotted at his throat, his overcoat beaded with rain. He stood in the doorway of Ava's apartment, taking in the scene: the dark rooms, Leo asleep on the couch, Ava sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest like a child, and something in his expression shifted from concern to understanding. He didn't ask questions. He just sat down next to her, his back against the couch, his shoulder touching hers. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just breathing in sync while the radiator clanked. And the oxygen concentrator wheezed and the city hummed outside the windows. "I need to tell you something," Ava said finally. "And then you need to leave." "I'm not leaving." "Mark, tell me what happened." "All of it." So she did. She told him about the alley, about Jackson Thorne and the bottle of scotch and the old man with the threadbare coat. She told him about the video that disappeared, about the summons to the commissioner's office, about being stripped of her badge in front of the entire morning roll call. She told him about the guardianship petition, about the $4.12 in her bank account, about the Medicare denial and the hospital discharge, and the slow-motion collapse of every system she'd ever trusted to work. Mark listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail, his jaw tight. When she finished, he said, "The old man. The one you helped. Do you remember what he looked like?" "White hair. Maybe 70. Educated voice." "Why?" Mark pulled out his phone, scrolled through his photos, turned the screen toward her. "Is this him?" The photo showed a man in a navy suit, standing at a podium with the seal of the Illinois Supreme Court behind him. The same pale eyes, the same carved features, but dressed like someone who mattered, someone with power. "Who is that?" Ava asked. "Elias Sterling, retired Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, also known as my uncle." The world tilted. "Your uncle," Ava repeated. "He retired 5 years ago after my aunt died, sold their house, gave most of his money to charity, and disappeared. The family's been trying to find him for months." Mark looked at the photo, then at Ava. "He was at that alley? In those clothes?" He said it was a misunderstanding. "It wasn't. My uncle." Mark paused, choosing his words carefully. "After my aunt died, he changed. He started talking about seeing the city as it really was, not from a courtroom or a mansion. He wanted to understand Chicago the way people who actually live here understand it. The family thought he was having some kind of breakdown. But maybe he was just trying to see the truth." Ava's mind was racing, connecting pieces she didn't know were part of the same puzzle. The Thornes. They knew who he was. They must have. Jackson, especially his father's been trying to get on the Supreme Court nomination list for years. If word got out that the commissioner's son was assaulting a retired justice. Mark's expression darkened. "That's why they came after you so hard. You weren't just a cop who witnessed something inconvenient. You were a witness to a crime that could destroy Richard Thorne's political career. Then why not just discredit me quietly? Why the public humiliation?" Because Thorne doesn't do anything quietly. He wanted everyone to know what happens when you cross his family. He wanted you broken. Mark took her hand, the one with the split knuckles from punching the locker. "But here's what he didn't count on: my uncle is still alive. Still sharp. Still has friends in places Thorne can't reach. That doesn't help me get my badge back. It doesn't save Leo. No, but it gives us leverage. Mark stood up, pulled Ava to her feet. Tomorrow morning, we're going to my uncle's estate. We're going to tell him everything. And then we're going to figure out how to fight back. Ava wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that one old man, even a former Supreme Court justice, could stand against the machinery of corruption that had spent the last 3 days systematically destroying her life. But belief required hope, and she'd run out of that somewhere between the guardianship petition and the $4.12 bank balance. Still, she nodded. Okay, tomorrow. Mark kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt like a promise. Get some sleep. You're going to need it. After he left, Ava lay down on the floor next to Leo's couch. She didn't trust herself to sleep in her own bed. Didn't want to be that far away in case something happened. In case his breathing stopped. In case this was the night his damaged heart finally gave out. She closed her eyes and listened to the wheeze of the concentrator, counting the seconds between breaths. Somewhere in the city, Elias Sterling was probably doing the same thing, lying awake in whatever room he was renting. Counting the hours until morning, remembering the young police officer who'd given him her last $20 and told him the city wasn't what it used to be. She was right about that. But maybe, just maybe, it could be again. Morning came with weak winter light filtering through the apartment windows, turning everything gray and indistinct. Ava woke on the floor, her neck stiff, her body aching from sleeping on hardwood. Leo was still breathing. She checked first thing, counted 3 full breaths before she allowed herself to move. And the oxygen concentrator was still wheezing its steady rhythm. She had 4 hours before Mark was supposed to pick her up. 4 hours to figure out what she was going to say to a retired Supreme Court justice. Assuming he even remembered her. Assuming he cared about what happened to a rookie cop who'd given him cab fare. But first, she needed to do something she'd been avoiding. Her father's storage unit was in a facility on the south side. One of those places with orange doors and combination locks and security cameras that may or may not actually work. Marcus Reed had rented it the year before he died, paid for 5 years in advance, and when the time ran out, Ava had renewed the lease even though she couldn't afford it, even though she never went there, even though she knew it was just a room full of boxes she didn't have the strength to open. The drive took 20 minutes. The storage facility looked exactly the same as it had 13 years ago. Same orange doors. Same cracked asphalt. Same chain link fence topped with barbed wire that was meant to keep people out but mostly just made the place look sadder. Unit 247. Third row from the back. Ava punched in the code her father's badge number, 4477, and the lock clicked open. The smell hit her first: cardboard and dust and something deeper, the ghost of her father's cologne, the one he wore on special occasions. She pulled the chain hanging from the ceiling and a bare bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the stacked boxes. Most of it was junk. Old uniforms, commendations in cheap frames, books on criminal justice and police procedure that were probably outdated the day they were published. She moved through the boxes methodically, checking each one, until she found the one labeled, "Just in case," in her father's handwriting. Inside was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a USB drive and a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. The note read, "Ava, if you're reading this, something's happened to me, and you're looking for answers. The drive has everything I couldn't say out loud. Names, dates, transactions. I was going to go to the feds, but I wanted to wait until I had it all documented. Until it was airtight. I'm sorry you have to carry this now. I'm sorry I couldn't finish what I started. Be careful. The people on this drive have long reach. I love you and Leo. Take care of each other. Dad." Ava's hands shook as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The files opened hundreds of scanned documents, transcripts of phone calls, photographs of men in expensive suits shaking hands in places they shouldn't be. Wire transfer records showing money moving from city accounts to private offshore holdings. And at the center of it all, Richard Thorne. 15 years of evidence showing how a patrol officer had climbed the ranks by erasing the evidence of others' crimes, by protecting the sons of wealthy families, by turning the CPD into a protection racket for anyone who could pay the right price. Her father had documented everything. Every bribe, every covered-up assault, every time Thorne had made a report disappear or a witness recant or a video file corrupt at just the right moment. Everything Ava had experienced in the last 3 days, the deleted cloud backup, the phantom complaint, the IT department claiming technical errors. Her father had seen Thorne do it dozens of times before. To other cops, to other witnesses, to anyone who threatened the carefully constructed empire of corruption that Thorne had built. Ava copied the drive, uploaded it to 3 different cloud services, emailed copies to herself at 4 different addresses. Belt and suspenders, and a backup parachute. Then she called the only person she trusted to know what to do with it. A disgraced journalist named Sarah Chen answered on the 3rd ring. "Who's this?" "Ava Reed, Officer Ava Reed. We met at the community center fundraiser. I remember. You're Marcus Reed's daughter. I have something you need to see." They met at a diner on Halsted. The kind of place that served coffee in chipped mugs and didn't care if you sat for 3 hours nursing 1 cup. Sarah Chen was 47, thin as a wire, with the kind of focused intensity that came from chasing stories nobody else wanted to touch. Ava slid the backup drive across the table. "What is this?" Sarah asked. 15 years of evidence showing CPD Commissioner Richard Thorne running the department like a criminal enterprise. "My father collected it before he died. I'm giving it to you." Sarah picked up the drive, turned it over in her fingers. "Why me?" "Because you got fired from the Tribune for refusing to kill a story about police corruption. Because everyone says you're difficult and obsessive and you don't know when to let things go." Ava leaned forward. "Because I need someone who won't back down when Thorne comes after them. And he will come after you. What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Just verify it, publish it, make sure everyone knows what he is." Sarah nodded slowly. "This could take weeks to fact-check. Then you better get started." Ava left the diner feeling lighter than she had in days, like she'd finally taken a breath after being underwater too long. She had one more stop to make before meeting Mark. The Sterling estate was in Lincoln Park, behind iron gates and manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than Ava made in a year. Mark was waiting in the driveway, standing next to his car, checking his watch. "You're late," he said when she pulled up. "I had something to take care of." "The journalist? How did you?" "Because I know you, and I know you weren't going to sit around waiting for someone else to fix this." He opened her car door. "Come on, my uncle's waiting." The house was exactly what Ava had expected: old money, quiet wealth, rooms full of furniture that predated the Civil War. A butler who actually existed answered the door and led them through halls lined with portraits of Sterling ancestors going back 6 generations. Elias Sterling was waiting in the study, dressed in casual slacks and a cardigan, looking nothing like the man she'd seen in the alley and everything like the Supreme Court justice in Mark's photo. "Officer Reed," he said, standing when she entered. His voice was the same educated, steady, the voice of someone used to being listened to. "Or should I say, former Officer Reed? You know what happened. I know everything that happened. I've been keeping an eye on the situation." He gestured to a leather chair. "Please, sit." Ava sat. Mark stood beside her, one hand on the back of her chair. "I owe you an apology," Elias continued. "What I did wandering the streets, putting myself in situations I had no business being in, it was reckless. And you paid the price for my curiosity." "Why were you there?" "Because I wanted to see what this city had become. Not from a bench or a boardroom, but from the street level where justice actually happens or fails to happen." He poured 3 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, the kind of small ceremony that bought time for thinking. "I spent 40 years interpreting the law, and in all that time, I never once saw what it looked like when the law failed someone. Until that night. Until your nephew says you have friends in high places." "I do. But friends won't fix this. What we need is evidence. He looked at her carefully. Do you have any? Ava pulled out her phone, showed him a screenshot of one of the files from her father's drive. 15 years worth. My father documented everything Thorne did. Every crime he covered up, every bribe he took, every officer he destroyed. Elias studied the screen, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a small, cold smile that had probably terrified defendants in his courtroom. Then today, the law finally speaks in the language of truth, not in the currency of power. He picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. Governor Morrison? It's Elias Sterling. Yes, I know it's early. I'm calling because I need you to listen very carefully. Richard Thorne is finished. I have the witness. I am the witness. And in approximately 4 hours, every major news outlet in Chicago is going to have documentation proving that your CPD commissioner has been running a protection racket for the last 15 years. A pause. Yes, I'll wait for your call. He hung up, turned back to Ava. It's done. Just like that? Just like that. The governor can't afford to be associated with this. He'll have Thorne's resignation by end of day, and the attorney general will have an indictment by end of week. Elias took her hand, the same hand she'd extended in the alley 3 nights ago when she'd given him $20. His grip was warm, steady, certain. You saved me, Officer Reed. You stood between me and people who wanted to hurt me, and you did it because it was right. Not because I was someone important. Just because it was right. Ava felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice on a lake when spring comes. I'm not a hero, she said. I'm just someone who lost everything. No, you're someone who gave everything for a stranger. There's a difference. He released her hand. Now let's get your life back. The Sterling dining room was designed to intimidate all dark, mahogany and crystal chandeliers, with portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring down from gilded frames. The table could seat 20, but tonight there were only 4 place settings. Elias at the head, Mark's mother Catherine at the opposite end, Mark and Ava on the sides. Ava hadn't wanted to come to this dinner. She'd wanted to go home, check on Leo, wait for Sarah Chen to call and confirm she'd started verifying the files. But Mark had insisted, and Elias had agreed, and somehow Ava found herself sitting in a room that cost more than her entire apartment building. Wearing the one dress she owned that wasn't secondhand, feeling like an imposter at a play she hadn't auditioned for. Catherine Sterling, Mark's mother, 62 years old, wearing pearls that probably had their own insurance policy, was making polite conversation about the weather and the upcoming spring season, and wasn't it nice that the gardens would be blooming just in time for the wedding. The wedding that Ava had planned to cancel 3 hours ago. The wedding that now felt like it existed in some parallel universe, where she was still employed, still solvent, still someone who could marry into a family like this without bringing disaster with her. Ava, dear, you're so quiet tonight, Catherine said, her voice warm but her eyes sharp. Is everything all right? This was it. This was the moment where Ava was supposed to smile and nod and pretend everything was fine. Where she was supposed to play the role of the grateful girlfriend, the cop's daughter, who'd lucked into a relationship with a Sterling, who should be thankful for the chance to climb out of poverty and into this world of chandeliers and crystal. Instead, Ava set down her fork. The sound of metal on china rang through the silent room. No, she said, everything is not all right. Mark tensed beside her. Catherine's smile froze. I'm a disgraced cop with a dying brother, Ava continued, her voice steady even as her hands shook. I have $4 in my bank account. The state is trying to take custody of Leo because they say I'm financially unfit. I was fired 3 days ago for doing my job, and the man who fired me is trying to destroy my life because I witnessed his son committing assault. She looked directly at Catherine. So no, everything is very much not all right. And I need to tell you that before this goes any further, before you start planning seating charts and flower arrangements for a wedding that probably shouldn't happen. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Elias Sterling spoke. The man from the alley, he said quietly. The one Ava stood up for. That was me. Catherine's head whipped toward her brother-in-law. I've been exploring the city, seeing how the other half lives. Jackson Thorne and his friends found me in an alley 3 nights ago. They poured a $500 bottle of scotch over my head and called me trash. Ava intervened. She gave me her last $20 for cab fare and told me to get somewhere safe. He looked at Ava, and his expression was gentle. She had no idea who I was. She helped me because it was the right thing to do. And Richard Thorne destroyed her career to cover up his son's crime. Catherine set down her wine glass very carefully. Elias, are you telling me that you've been living on the streets? Not living, visiting, observing, trying to understand what justice looks like to people who can't afford lawyers. He stood, walked to where Ava was sitting, and placed a hand on her shoulder. This young woman has more integrity in her broken knuckles than Richard Thorne has in his entire decorated career. And today, I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. What are you going to do? Catherine asked. I'm going to call the governor. On speakerphone. Right now. Elias pulled out his cell phone, set it in the center of the table, and dialed. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Elias. I was expecting your call. Governor Morrison. I'm here with my family and Officer Ava Reed, the woman whose life Richard Thorne attempted to destroy for witnessing a crime committed by his son. A long pause. Then, the Attorney General has already issued a warrant for Jackson Thorne's arrest. Assault, witness intimidation, destruction of evidence. Richard Thorne submitted his resignation 20 minutes ago. Ava's world tilted sideways. Resigned. Richard Thorne, the man who'd stood in front of morning roll call and called her a disgrace, who'd taken her badge and weapon, who'd filed guardianship petitions and corrupted evidence servers and systematically dismantled her life, had resigned. What about Officer Reed's employment status? Elias asked. The suspension has been lifted. Her badge and weapon are waiting at the precinct. With a formal apology from the interim commissioner. Another pause. She should also know that the state's attorney general is reviewing the guardianship petition filed against her. Given the circumstances, I expect it will be dismissed. Ava couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room was spinning, and the only thing anchoring her was Mark's hand finding hers under the table, his grip tight and certain. Thank you, Governor, Elias said. He ended the call, turned to Ava. You saved me. You stood in an alley in December and put yourself between me and people who wanted to hurt me, and you did it for no reason except that it was right. For once, the paperwork protected someone instead of erasing them. Ava felt the tears coming and couldn't stop them. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast, and she didn't care that Catherine was watching, that she was crying in front of people who probably thought emotions were meant to be kept private, controlled, hidden behind good breeding and proper etiquette. I thought I'd lost everything, she whispered. You almost did, but you're still here. You're still standing, and that matters more than you know. Elias pulled out his chair, sat down beside her. I've spent 40 years on the bench watching people like Richard Thorne game the system. Watching them use money and power and connections to rewrite reality. And every time, I told myself that the law would eventually catch up to them. That justice would prevail. He smiled, and it was sad and knowing and tired. But justice doesn't prevail on its own. It needs witnesses. It needs people like you who refuse to look away when something is wrong, even when looking away would be easier, safer, smarter. I didn't do anything special. You gave me $20 you couldn't afford. You recorded evidence when your body cam failed. You kept showing up even when the world was telling you to quit. That's not nothing, Ava. That's everything. Mark's mother had been silent through this entire exchange, her face unreadable. Now she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. Ava, Catherine said, I owe you an apology. I've been polite to you, cordial. But I've never really welcomed you into this family because I couldn't see past the differences in our circumstances. I saw a police officer with student loans and a sick brother, and I thought. She stopped, chose her words carefully. I thought you were a liability. I thought you would drag my son down. Mom, Mark started, but Catherine held up one hand. Let me finish. I was wrong. You're not a liability. You're exactly the kind of person this family needs. Someone who knows what it costs to do the right thing and does it anyway. She looked at Elias. Someone like Marcus Reed. Someone like the man my husband used to be before he forgot that wealth is a responsibility, not a right. She stood, walked around the table to where Ava was sitting, and did something Ava never expected. She pulled her into a hug. Welcome to the family, Catherine whispered. For real this time. The dinner that followed was strange and surreal, conversations about wedding venues and spring flowers, about Leo's medical care, and which specialists the Sterling's connections could expedite appointments with, about Ava's career and whether she wanted to stay in patrol or move into investigative work. It felt like a dream, like she'd fallen through a trapdoor into someone else's life, someone who had options and support and a future that extended beyond the next paycheck. When dessert came, some elaborate chocolate thing that probably required 3 days and a team of pastry chefs to make, Elias raised his glass. To Ava Reed, he said, who reminded me that justice isn't something that happens in courtrooms. It's something that happens in alleys, on cold December nights, when one person decides that another person's dignity matters more than their own safety. Everyone drank, and Ava, for the first time in 3 days, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, late, reluctant, but undeniable. The ice on Lake Michigan melted slowly, breaking apart into chunks that drifted south toward the locks. And the wind that had been cruel in December turned merely cold, then cool, then almost pleasant. The trees along the streets budded green, and the city shook off winter like a dog shaking off water, emerging muddy and tired but fundamentally alive. Ava stood in Grant Park, watching Leo walk. Not shuffle, not limp, walk normal, easy, the way a 21-year-old should walk, his hands in his pockets and his face turned toward the sun. The surgery had happened 6 weeks ago, the transplant successful beyond what any of the doctors had dared predict. The Sterling family's connections had moved him to the top of the list. But it was his own strength that had pulled him through the recovery, his own stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds looked impossible. He was wearing the jacket Ava had bought him for his last birthday. Back when she thought she'd never be able to afford anything else. Back when every purchase felt like choosing between two necessary evils. Now it just looked like a jacket. Blue, warm, nothing more complicated than that. You're staring, Leo said without turning around. I'm allowed to stare. You were dead 2 months ago. I was never dead, just resting. He grinned, that old familiar grin that Ava hadn't seen since before the diagnosis, before the oxygen concentrator, before any of this. Besides, you're the one who pulled off a miracle. I just had to lie there and let someone else's heart do the work. That's not how miracles work, isn't it? He turned to face her. You stood up for a stranger. You lost everything. You fought back anyway. And now I'm here, walking in the park on a Tuesday afternoon like a normal person. Sounds like a miracle to me. Ava couldn't argue with that. They walked together toward the fountain, past families, with strollers and tourists taking photos and teenagers cutting class to smoke cigarettes behind the pavilion. The city was waking up, remembering how to be itself again, and Ava was part of that awakening. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Chen, front page tomorrow. Every major outlet picking it up. They're calling it the biggest CPD corruption scandal in 50 years. Ava smiled, typed back, glad I could help. The investigation had moved fast once Sarah's story broke. Federal prosecutors had gotten involved. Grand juries were convened. Richard Thorne was facing 17 counts of corruption, obstruction, and racketeering. Jackson Thorne was awaiting trial on assault charges, with 3 more witnesses coming forward every day. People who'd been too afraid to speak up before but who saw Ava's story and decided that maybe silence wasn't the only option. The interim commissioner had personally returned Ava's badge and weapon, along with a formal apology and an offer to move her to any unit she wanted. She'd chosen internal affairs. Because if the system was broken, the only way to fix it was from the inside, one case at a time. One corrupt cop at a time, until the machinery worked the way it was supposed to. It wouldn't be easy. It would probably be harder than patrol, more dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with guns or gangs. But Ava had learned something in the 3 days between the alley and the Sterling dining room. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the only thing worth doing. Her phone buzzed again. "Mark, coffee at the diner?" She texted back 20 minutes. The diner was the same one where she'd met Sarah Chen, where she'd slid a USB drive across a chipped Formica table and set everything in motion. It looked different now, brighter, cleaner, though nothing about the place had actually changed. Maybe it was just her. Mark was already there, sitting in a booth near the window, 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table. He looked tired. He'd been working 16-hour days, helping his uncle sort through the legal fallout, making sure every piece of evidence was cataloged and cross-referenced and ready for trial. "Hey," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hey yourself." He pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. "How's Leo?" "Walking, smiling, being annoying in all the ways a little brother should be." She took a sip of coffee, grimaced. It was terrible, always had been, probably always would be. But it was their terrible coffee. The kind you drank because it was tradition, not because it was good. "How's your uncle?" Relieved. "He's been carrying around guilt about what happened to you for weeks." Mark reached across the table, took her hand. "He wants to know if you'll speak at his retirement event. The formal one, where they name a courtroom after him." "Me? Why?" "Because you reminded him why he became a judge in the first place. Because you showed him that the system can still work if people are willing to fight for it." Mark squeezed her hand. "Also because he likes you better than most of his actual family." Ava laughed, a sound that still felt new, unfamiliar, like a muscle she was just remembering how to use. They sat in the diner for an hour, talking about nothing important: the wedding plans that were finally moving forward, the apartment they were looking at in Wicker Park, the vacation they were planning for after the trials wrapped up. Normal things, future things, the kind of conversations that assumed tomorrow would come and would be worth planning for. When they finally left, the sun was setting over the city, turning the glass towers gold and pink. Ava stood on the sidewalk, watching the light change, thinking about her father and the badge she'd almost shredded and the old man in the alley, who turned out to be a Supreme Court justice. She thought about the night she'd hit rock bottom, sitting in her dark apartment with $4.12 in her account and a brother who was dying and a future that looked like nothing but closed doors. And she thought about Elias Sterling's words: "Justice needs witnesses." That's all she'd been, a witness, someone who saw something wrong and decided not to look away, even when looking away would have been easier, safer, smarter. Starting over wasn't failure, it was freedom. Ava walked to her car, not the old patrol car she'd driven as a rookie, but a newer used sedan that Mark had helped her buy, nothing fancy but reliable, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine running, heat blowing through the vents. She pulled out her father's badge from her glove compartment, the one she'd kept all this time, the one she'd almost destroyed in a moment of despair. Number 4477. She ran her thumb over the silver, felt the weight of it, the history. Then she put it back in the glove compartment, closed it, and drove toward home. Not her father's home, not the apartment where she'd struggled to keep Leo alive on a broken concentrator and hope, but the new apartment in Wicker Park, the one with 2 bedrooms and windows that actually closed all the way, and a radiator that didn't clank like it was trying to wake the dead. The apartment where Leo was probably already asleep on the couch, his new heart beating strong and steady. The apartment where Mark would show up later with takeout and they'd eat dinner on the floor because they hadn't bought furniture yet. And that was okay, because they had time. They had time. At 28, Ava Reed had learned that the darkest alleys sometimes lead to the brightest light. And she'd learned that carrying a badge wasn't about the metal pinned to your chest. It was about standing up when it would be easier to walk away. It was about giving your last $20 to a stranger who needed it more than you did. It was about believing, even when belief was the hardest thing in the world, that justice was still possible if someone was willing to witness it. She'd been that witness, and tomorrow, she'd be that witness again. For as long as it took. For as long as the city needed her. For as long as there were alleys that needed light. Friends, how did you find today's story? Ava Reed thought she was just doing her job. She thought standing up for a stranger on a cold December night was the kind of thing any good cop would do. She had no idea that the old man in the threadbare coat was a retired Supreme Court justice. She had no idea that the man pouring scotch over his head was the son of the most powerful cop in Chicago. She just saw someone who needed help, and she helped. That's all. And for that simple act of human decency, they tried to destroy her. They took her badge. They emptied her bank account. They came for her dying brother. They stood in front of her colleagues and called her a disgrace to her father's name. They did everything they could to make her disappear, to make her an example, to show the world what happens when you cross people with power. But here's what Richard Thorne and his son didn't understand: when you try to erase someone who's already lost everything, you give them something far more dangerous than money or status or connections. You give them clarity. Ava Reed stopped being afraid because there was nothing left to be afraid of. She stopped worrying about the future because the present was already disaster. And in that moment of absolute bottom, she found the one thing that power can never take away: the choice to stand up anyway. There's a lesson here that goes beyond Chicago, beyond courtrooms and corrupt commissioners and dramatic confrontations in dining rooms lined with crystal. The lesson is this: doing the right thing will cost you. Sometimes it will cost you everything. Your job, your security, your comfort, your peace of mind. But the alternative, looking away, staying quiet, choosing safety over integrity, that costs you something too. It costs you the person you thought you were. It costs you the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize who's looking back. Ava could have walked past that alley. She could have pretended not to see an old man being humiliated by rich kids with expensive scotch and no consequences. She could have told herself it wasn't her problem, that she had enough to worry about with Leo's medical bills and her own survival. But she didn't, and that choice, that split-second decision to be a witness instead of a bystander, changed everything. Not just for her, not just for Elias Sterling, but for every cop who'd been silenced by Richard Thorne over 15 years. For every victim who'd watched justice get bought off or intimidated into silence. For every person who'd ever wondered if standing up was worth the risk. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage echo the loudest. Sometimes giving $20 to a stranger matters more than any grand gesture. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, and you do it anyway. Because that's what integrity looks like when everything else has been stripped away. At 28, Ava Reed learned that rock bottom has a trapdoor. And on the other side isn't more darkness, it's the kind of clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. She learned that the law isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. It's something that happens in alleys, on cold December nights, when one person decides that another person's dignity matters. She learned that starting over isn't failure. It's freedom. And she learned that the badge she almost shredded wasn't just a piece of metal with a number on it. It was a promise, a covenant between her and a city that desperately needed people willing to keep that promise even when it cost everything. I hope this story brought you something meaningful. Maybe it reminded you of a time you stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Maybe it gave you permission to speak up the next time you see something wrong. Maybe it just reminded you that good people still exist, that integrity still matters, that the darkness hasn't won yet. Whatever you take from Ava's story, hold on to it. Because the world needs witnesses. It needs people who refuse to look away. It needs you. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you even a moment of hope that justice is still possible, please subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from today, and what you would have done in Ava's position. Because stories like this don't just entertain us, they remind us who we want to be. And sometimes, that reminder is exactly what we need to find the courage to become that person. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of a community that still believes in standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let the darkness win. Until next time, friends, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop being a witness.